Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the implications of tidying up the voter rolls, the electoral rolls in the United States, and there's various efforts going to tidy them up and to prevent voter fraud. Now, what the 2020 election has shown us more than any other election, I think, is the extent of fraud that can be perpetrated during an election. And this was at multiple levels. Not only were districts won by the Democrats in the House of Representatives very suspect, but also 2, if not 3, Senate races were also very suspect. But of course, the creme de la creme of it all was the very super suspect Joe Biden win in that election. I mean, to this very day, the leftists and the globalists and Wikipedia and all these, they cling to this view that Biden was just a super popular president with kick-ass policies that delivered the White House with an all-time in history presidential record in terms of the number of votes, 81 million votes. I mean, like, wow, holy fuck and wow. That Biden guy was popular. Now, he may have had no policies. He may not even have campaigned. He may not have been able to string a sentence together without fucking it up. But none of that matters. He was as popular as fuck and got 81 million. The all-time record by a country mile. The all-time record before Biden won, the all-time record for a winning presidential candidate was Obama, and he had a massive college kid turnout, and he got, I think, 69 million votes. But Joe Biden beat Obama, and Obama was a hard-working campaigner. He campaigned his ass off, and he's quite a good speaker. He might have been a useless president, but he campaigned hard, and he was quite a good public speaker. And Biden beat Obama by 12.5 million votes. I mean, just let that sink in. Doddering old Biden that couldn't put a sentence together, didn't campaign at all, and was a fucking useless speaker on top of that. He beats Obama by 12.5 million votes, or so we're told. Now, the reality is, when you start to do a bit of a dive into things, and I'll cite movies, documentaries like Dinesh D'Souza's 2000 Mules as an example. That's certainly worth looking at if you haven't already, and I'm pretty sure it's online. The amount of suspect votes in that election was somewhere between 20 and 22 million. So, and I think Trump in that election got something like 73 million votes. I think that was more or less accurate. I think the loading that they did, the deep state and the globalist deep state did, was to load up Biden's votes rather than to suppress Trump's votes. So I assume it's somewhere in that was probably a somewhat accurate number. So coming to Biden's votes, though, something between 20 and 22 million votes were fraudulently brought into being in that election. That's really before you get to the gerrymandering issues, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, that's a lot of votes to will into existence. Now, it's the side that thinks they're going to lose that has the motivation to do the voter fraud stuff. So the Democrats had done their numbers, the globalist controlled Democrats had done their numbers on the election, and they thought, shit, it's pretty likely Trump's going to win here. So we got to do something to stop that. And remember, you're dealing with the globalists, you're dealing with people who are prepared to rig any election, rig any court case, bring any amount of false charges, to arbitrarily arrest whoever they want to. This is their view. This is, we're allowed to do this because we're fighting Hitler, and that's their mindset. The justification is they just invoke the word fascist, and then that allows them to commit any amount of crimes, no matter how high-handed and outrageous. They can just do it. We're allowed to. We're morally allowed to do this, and that's an attitude. I mean, the string pullers and the puppet masters, they're not thinking of what's moral or isn't. They're just thinking of raw power. Trump's going to get in the way of our agenda. We have to stop him. Do we have to rig an election? Fine, do it. Do we have to rig court cases? Got to do it. So there's no compunction on their part. It's the street soldiers and the foot soldiers that they infuse with sort of moral fervour. But the string pullers and the puppet masters, they don't give a shit about that. But coming back to the issue here, somewhere between 20 and 22 million votes were brought in to make sure Biden got elected, and a less electable candidate you'd struggle to find. So it just shows how much work they had to do to get him across the line and make him look plausible. Look, he's the record. Look at the highest number of votes in all time. Look at what a popular president is. I mean, wow, look, hey, legitimacy on steroids here. But of course, the exact Biden would have got somewhere about 60 million votes, give or take. And the diehard Democrats, just people who orange man, bad voters, that sort of stuff. So he'd have got about 60 million, which is about the number of votes that the demonstrably weaker, less popular candidate gets on a relative basis. Like if you look at the trend lines throughout all American presidential elections, it washes up at around that, and that would have kept Biden within the trend line. The 81 million votes was wildly outside of the trend, wildly outside of it. So now the votes were just plain, multiple ballots printed and then fake votes for Biden put onto it. The number of double voting, dead people voting, people who moved interstate but had 2 votes or even 3 votes if they moved around. So there was a lot of that, but I think the fake ballots were the bigger thing. Now, the 2 areas of concern that anybody who's concerned with election integrity should be looking at is the chain of custody when votes are moved from a voting centre or like a street ballot box, something like that. They get moved to maybe an intermediary collation point, and then finally to the final counting, vote counting centre. And the amount of votes that where the chain of custody didn't exist or had been broken, that is, 2 people, the 2 people are meant to sign. I give you these 100 votes to the dude appears in the truck or something. I give you these 100 votes to take to the collation or the counting centre. Then 2 people sign for those votes, and yep, I have received that box containing, the ballot box containing 100 votes. That then moves to the, however many hops it has. And if it's like a big state with a lot of distance, then it may hop 2 or 3 times before it gets to the final counting centre. There were approximately 12 million votes, as I understand it, where the chain of custody was broken. Now, the law is, in most places at least, you can't count those votes. Now, those votes were overwhelmingly for Biden, wherever the chain of custody was broken. Wherever the chain of custody was intact, the votes were, sort of around that 50-50 sort of thing. And so the chain of custody was a major issue. Now, the second issue was where mail-in ballots, where votes, where signature matching had to take place. So the signatures on the outside of the envelope, the votes inside the ballot paper, the votes inside the envelope, and it has to be folded twice to fit into that envelope. And the vote counters have to go onto a database that has the signature of the electronic sort of image of the signature of the voter on there. They then have to match the signature to the vote. Now, there were many hundreds of thousands of votes, particularly in the swing states, where the voter wasn't even registered on that database. Yet somehow those votes still were counted. And in other instances where it was checked, so the amount of votes that were being counted and the time that it took, for example, 26 seconds for this as an efficient operator to get the envelope, look at call up, it's Billy Bob Smith, to call up Billy Bob Smith, look at Billy Bob's signature, do the signatures match, then they open the envelope, or then they look at the vote rather, then tally that, whether it's for Trump or Biden. And it was done that it was measured that they were spending less than 1 second on each vote count. So it wouldn't be physically possible to open the envelope, do the signature match. And I mean, it takes longer than 1 second just for the screen to load with the signature information on it. So clearly the votes weren't being, the signatures weren't being verified. And there was somewhere between 9 and 10 million votes that fell into that category, including people that weren't even registered on the, how can you declare a vote as being? Now, you're meant to hold that information for 30 days, minimum 30 days. And if you want it to be audited and you want to appear, you've got a clean and totally clean election, you'd want to hang it, you'd want it to be audited because you'd want to prove, no, this is a good, but instead within days of the vote being allegedly counted, they were shredding all this evidence. So there was, vast swathes of evidence suddenly went missing and it just couldn't be audited. Now, for a lot of the ballots, supposedly mail-in ballots that were counted, a lot of those had no folds in them. Now, if you've got to fold it twice to mail it, and it's been in the mail going to the voter, then in the mail coming back, then those folds, those creases in the paper, the ballot paper, are going to be fairly clear and obvious. But thousands of ballots that were audited had no creases or folds in them. Clearly, they hadn't been mailed, and yet they were counted as mail-in ballots. Again, these ballots were overwhelmingly for Biden. So when you look at all there were no audits on double voting or triple voting and this sort of thing, and just spot checks that people were going around, various organisations going around spot checking voter rolls. They were finding 5% of the voters, and even higher in some cases, didn't even exist, or if they had, or the address didn't exist. You're looking at addresses that were vacant blocks of land, or addresses that had, that were in an underpass on a highway, or so. These sorts of things. So again, a lot of fraud there. Similarly, there were addresses that had 10,000 voters registered. So a 5-bedroom house has 10,000 voters registered at it. None of these things, to my knowledge, none of these things have been fully investigated. Some have been spot checked, and where there's been a prima facie case for further investigation. But to the best of my knowledge, there were no additional investigations beyond that. Now, what happens if those 20 to 22 million, give or take, voter discrepancy, either the capacity to invent votes, such as hundreds of thousands of votes suddenly appearing at 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's no scrutineers around, so complete breakdown of the system. If you look at all those votes, the systems and procedures that allow that, whether it be sloppiness, inability to maintain voter rolls, or illegal aliens voting, and that was particularly big in the voter harvesting side of things, that again were millions of votes there. What if all that's cleaned up, and then on top of that, the gerrymandering? Now, the gerrymandering alone in the United States, in states that have been, where the Democrats have instituted gerrymandering policies, they're allegedly worth to the Democrats. They almost guarantee them 20 odd, give or take. Some say as high as 26, but say 25. The guarantee the Democrats 25 seats in the House of Representatives. Now, if that's all the gerrymandering, if that's all cleaned up, the Democrats will be hard pushed to win that, because the House is usually won by less than 30 seats either way. So the Democrats would struggle to win the House in a lot of the elections. There are certain cases where they would have, but not very many. In terms of tidying up the illegal alien voting and things like that in the Senate, that's supposedly worth 3 to 4 Senate seats to the Democrats. So if that's gone, then again, given most of the Senates are 52-48, in the outset, you get 54-46 is considered to be a substantial majority in Senate terms. So the Democrats would struggle to win the Senate anywhere near as often as they are. In terms of the presidential election, you'd look at, say, Obama's election. That the first one he probably would have won. The second one, I'm not so sure. Bill Clinton, no, he'd have won one, but not the other. If you look at the tidying up, particularly the illegal alien. So the illegal alien issues voting wasn't such an issue, say, when, I don't know, Jimmy Carter got elected, for example. It is an issue today, however. So once that voter ID, for example, when these things are implemented, that alone could take 10 to 15 million votes away. Voter ID, that sort of stuff could take 10 to 15 million votes away from the Democrats. And you look at this in the wider perspective of, again, we're looking at a sort of a floating chunk of 20 to 22 million fraudulent votes that the Democrats can call on whenever they want it. And again, they rely on sloppy procedures, counting votes where there's no chain of custody and, all that sort of stuff. Then what chance that the Democrats don't have a whole lot of chance of winning presidential elections again. So obviously they're very committed to preventing any return to or any establishment of voter integrity and clean votes. And because I think in democracy, the voice of the people is critically important. To the globalists and their flunkies, the Democrats, the voice of the people is the last thing you want. Anything you can do to stop it or prevent it is what you have to do. So they're opposing Trump at every turn and every opportunity, using their activist judges and so on. But this could the potential to completely change the electoral landscape if President Trump is successful in this, and he's doing all right so far, successful in cleaning up this electoral fraud, mass electoral fraud. Then the globalists are going to have to change their tactics. They're going to have to make sure they fully take over the Republican Party. So there's no people that oppose the globalist project, no matter who you vote in. You've always got pro-globalist flunkies and stooges in control. I mean, they've already gone a good way to doing that anyway. But in terms of electoral outcomes, if they can't rig the electoral outcome, which they only did because Trump was running and they didn't control him. They didn't control him enough. So they had to have a controllable stooge in there, which of course was Biden. And in order to get him in there, they had to rig the votes. But if they can't rig the votes, they'll just switch to another method of controlling the body's politic. And that's something too, I think, that President Trump is moving to limit by making sure, rhino Republicans aren't being selected to stand for electoral office. And hopefully there'll be a lot of accomplishments and achievements in that area, which will prevent the globalists again. But this is probably the first serious challenge the globalists have had since the late 80s, early 90s, or mid 80s. This first serious challenge the globalists have had to their global hegemony coming in the form of President Trump, which is, of course, why they tried to kill him or put him in prison, rig elections against him, and so on. But this is a huge change here. Just cleaning up the electoral rolls alone represents a massive change, and one that I think is welcome. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.